I'm Wendy Haines.
And I'm Steely.
And we are senior consultants with the Institute for Gender Partnership.
And today we're going to be talking about what it takes in today's world to make a difference in the context of gender equality and the gender space and being more productive as leaders. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? Well, today we take a look into the gender gap. Is it rhetoric or is it real? And if it's real, are we actually committed to closing it? Stay tuned to find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episode on our Facebook page. Go to Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty podcast on Facebook. If you're a new listener, a new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant. So please go to iTunes or Spotify or wherever it is you go. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really helps. I sincerely appreciate it. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Las Vegas to Florida. And now we're even picked up in Washington, D.C., just so that the FBI can spy on us on 96.7 FM. Also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. If you want to tune into the show in other ways, that you can catch us on Google Home, Alexa, Spotify by simply saying play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, entrepreneur leader, or a leader in any capacity whatsoever, you know there's a lot of talk about the need for gender equality. But we also know that there are many folks who are dragging their heels about the idea of equal pay or gender partnership. So is this an issue in your organization? If it isn't, how long will it be before it becomes one? What is the cost of gender inequality? And what can we do about it? Well, let's find out together. My guests today on this episode are Steely and Wendy Haines. Wendy and Chris serve as senior consultants with the Institute for Gender Partnership as they train and facilitate business imperative around effective business leadership. Collectively, they've got over 40 years of experience engaging, mostly on Chris's side, leadership in conversations that inspire them to step up in their games and effectively engage their teams and build companies that work. They have a particular passion for supporting organizations in shifting their culture to one of gender partnership. As authors, certified coaches, and seasoned business executives with international exposure in various markets, Chris and Wendy bring unique skill sets, helping leaders make the distinctions that they need to make in order to make the difference that matters. From the Institute of Gender Partnership, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Wendy Haines and Steely.
Thank you. Everybody, take your seats, please. Everybody, just take your seats. Thank you very much.
We're here all week. I'm going to sit and wait this. Hey guys, I'm so glad to have you with us. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and honor to have you both here. This is a very important subject, and I want to dive into it. But before I do, I want to ask both of you individually, who is someone who we likely wouldn't know who's been a major influence on your life and why? Either of you can go first.
All right. Well, there's a little bit of processing time, but he came right to my head. So Wendy, you have the benefit of thinking it through. But for me, it was just immediate. It was without hesitating. It was my father. My father was my, obviously my father figure, but he was also my best friend, a great mentor and a role model in my life. And he set me on a great course early. He passed away about 10 years ago. But it was just an amazing influence. Obviously, lots of people have influenced me, but that was the one that popped right into my head.
Tell me why.
Well, he was a good man. He had a hard life. I think he raised a good son. He was a Marine. He went Marine Corps, and frankly, for me, when the war started 24 years ago, I became a Marine as well. So he set that example, and it was the example of honor, courage, commitment, and that's the way he raised me from a young kid. And I reflect on his life and how he became who he was, and for some reason he was able to raise somebody who I think is a pretty good guy, and I got to give him the credit for that. But just a great example.
And that's your brother, right?
My father. No brothers.
No, you said he raised a good man.
Oh, you're right. That's good. I love you, Dom. You rock.
You will catch up eventually. It's okay.
Eventually, yes.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. What about you, Wendy?
So the first person that popped into my mind is my first sensei.
Ah.
And her name is Rachel Evans, and she headed up this incredible dojo in Seattle where I was living at the time. And she was an incredible influence on my life and really set me on a trajectory where I became physically empowered in a way that I hadn't been before. And the context of the study of the art was very much not about fighting, but about moving energy and, coming fully into yourself. And yeah, little did I know that was going to set me on a path where I got a black belt and taught martial arts for a number of years. So she was an incredible influence and such a powerful woman on every level.
Awesome. I love asking that question. And I don't set, and everybody, if you're listening, just so you know, I don't let any of my guests know I'm going to ask it. So unless they've recently listened to a show, they don't know that's coming. Because I think that, it's very easy for us to, say, oh, well, Gandhi or Martin Luther King or, some big, everybody knows. But every one of us was influenced by somebody that most people won't know. There was a direct impact from somebody whose name will not be mentioned, and they help set the direction of our lives. So thank you both for sharing that. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Now, you both have worked across many industries, including technology, entertainment, the military. Where have you seen, let's start with the problem. Where have you seen the greatest gender gap? Where does that tend to show up? Does it have an industry, or is it something else altogether?
I'll step in with that. So I'm the one who comes from many years in the entertainment industry, and just given what's happening in that landscape right now, I think that there's a visibility there that is highlighting the gap in a pretty obvious way. And I also think what's relevant about that is the entertainment industry so profoundly shapes our culture. And so as, the spotlight is coming on to, gender issues in the entertainment industry, I think it gives us an opportunity to pull back the curtain and actually look at, okay, well, if this industry is so impacted in this way, how are the issues of, gender imbalance, sexism, et cetera, how are those issues actually influencing the content that continues to shape the world? So I don't know if it is more, more prevalent in that industry. I think it's prevalent in many industries, but there is a significance in looking at. That's
a really great point, because of course we are culturally influenced by the entertainment industry as a general, whether that's movies or music or whatever it might be. And of course, Hollywood has made a big statements around the Me Too movement and all of that. But at the same time, it's probably been one of the most guilty of that, in history. And of course, you would have very firsthand experience of that. Being a woman in that industry is, I can't even imagine, And I know that many men went through sexual harassment and all kinds of stuff in the industry as well. But, do you, as somebody from that industry, do you look at it and go, it's about time, or do you see it as, is it rhetoric? Is I guess my question, from somebody on the inside.
Yeah. So as somebody on the inside that, once I became present to, gender imbalance in the industry, and then the direct impact on me as a storyteller and
Sure.
and how challenging that was as a woman, I stepped in and decided to become a part of the solution. And in doing that, I came to know the many, 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 many people who've been working for decades
Right.
on this issue in the industry, trying to make a difference. And I think what's significant about this moment in the industry is that with the visibility and with the significance of the people who are accused, and because we all know those people, I think it's a wake-up moment. And it's a moment that actually affords us the opportunity to be engaged in this wave of change that can really positively impact everyone and every industry.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to shape the culture.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side, Chris, you come from a military background, and in your bio it talks about how you were responsible for integrating the first female Marines into a company of 200 male Marines with a combat specialty. Talk to us about that industry, because that also seems to be, I mean, it's interesting that you're both from these places that seem to be, if I was going to score them high on the gender inequality, both of them would score very high, I would imagine. So tell us about what that was like for you.
It's interesting because when you think about the military, you think about, fighting in war and battle and everything, usually, it's a male's environment, it's a masculine thing. And it's funny, as I reflect on that, I got to tell you, out of all organizations, all type of niches I've been involved with in my life, the Marine Corps was probably the most diverse, and they embraced diversity more than any organization. So back in '93, when I had a command of 200 Marines, Headquarters Marine Corps changed the designation of our occupational specialty and brought the first Lance Corporal woman into the environment. And for me, it was easy, because I had conditioned the Marines, and Marines are conditioned to kind of do what it takes to adapt and overcome. Right. And it's interesting because that really wasn't the toughest environment, to be able to integrate women into that masculine, environment. And frankly, it worked really well. The gentleman embraced her as practically a sister. And I think I had something to do with that, but frankly, I set the example that it was the way to go. And, ever since then, it's just been natural for men and women to work effectively together,
Yeah, I find that very interesting. I spoke for the U.S. Air Force a couple of years ago, and one of the things I said from the stage, because I got to meet them and I got to hang out with them beforehand for a day or two, and I said, thank you for breaching my bias, because I carried this bias about what it meant to be military, and it was wonderful to see that it wasn't what I thought it was, that I got to see women in great deal of power and many free-thinking individuals, and in my brain it was very masculine, and in my brain it was very you're not allowed to think for yourself, and it was not what I found at all. So it was wonderful. So it's great to see that both of you come from these places that we as in people on the outside may have very strong bias about, and see that how you are helping to breach the bias around that. Wendy, let me jump in. Culturally, in the gender space, it has been there's a high awareness of equality or gender equality. I think probably now it's higher than it's been since the 1960s in the women's movement. But here we are 50 years later, and women still earn less than men. How do we dive deeper into this? How do we how do we stop skimming the surface, I guess is my question. Because I think a lot of these things are talked about but not acted upon in any real and meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about that. One is that, we as humans are resistant to change.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a natural part of us. And so we're going to continue in the norm or the status quo until something causes us to have to change.
Right.
And motivates us to do that. And you said a deeper dive. I think it is the time for the deeper dive, and that's what's required. And then we ask, well, a deeper dive into what?
Right.
And really, it's a deeper dive into really opening our eyes to the impact of the imbalance.
Mm.
The status quo really is the imbalance. So that's the norm. That's what we're all used to. But if we can start to really look at the impact, not only for women, but for men, and in business, there's a bottom line impact when men and women can't work fruitfully and well together, right? We're missing out on some of the great qualities of each of the genders if we're operating right in an imbalance. And so if we can start to become aware, get curious and look to see, okay, in my organization or even in my life, where does imbalance exist? And then what is the impact of that? That can start to motivate us to change. I think we have to be willing as individuals, as leaders, to take a look at our own bias, and to, again, just be curious. Like, how have I been raised in this world where there's a gender imbalance? So how have I been impacted by that?
But I think you're asking us to look at something we can't see. What I mean by that is, that blind spots are called out for a simple reason. We can't see them. I was speaking to somebody recently about white privilege. By the way, if you don't know, as you're listening, I'm a white guy, right? White privilege. So, if you're a white person, you don't know what white privilege is because that's what you grew up with. It's all you know. And I think it's the same with gender bias. It's like, we don't actually, I'm not even aware of it. And what I want to do is to bring our awareness to how do we even get to, how do we peel off the blinkers and actually see that actually I don't think of women in the same way. I make racist comments that are not with any ill feeling or it's language that's become part of the lexicon, and a person uses that language that's racist and they don't know, or they use language that's sexist, and it's not because they're mean or horrible or don't like women. It's because it's so part of the natural lexicon of language that we don't hear. And on the other side of it, just as a counter for a moment, is the hypervigilance that creates craziness, where, you don't like women because you used a statement. No, it's not that I don't like women or I don't think women are equal. It's so unconscious. And as you very well said, we resist change. So help us to grasp how to get past our own blind spots.
Okay. Two things. One, as an individual, to get curious about the subject and start to educate yourself. There are a couple of documentaries that are incredibly enlightening. The Mask We Live In really looks at what is the impact of being raised as a male in today's culture. Misrepresentation is, the one that takes a look at how it is to be raised as a woman. And we as women and men can look at both of those documentaries and go, wow. I mean, everybody will learn something. They'll learn something about themselves. They'll learn something about the other genders that they really care about. And so we start to educate ourselves to get more insight. As leaders in organizations, again, starting with the education, but then taking a real look at, wow, how are the men and the women in my organization, on my leadership teams, on all of my teams, how are they working together and how are they not? Are my people thriving here? And if they're not, get into conversation, right? I mean, that's the work that we do. We come into an organization, we sit down, we open up the conversation. So we actually get people hearing from each other to build that awareness and understanding. That's where it all starts.
And just to dovetail off that, it's all about awareness, self-awareness, and kind of playing off the comment I was going to make before. It's actually more appropriate to talk about it now, whether it be in the military or in business. Men and women, we kind of think differently. It's cliche, right? But when it comes to business, there's a thought process of convergence where we want to converge on an objective. You know, like men typically think about, back to the military, we want to take the high ground and win the game, right? Women typically think on a divergent perspective, of collaborative intuition, reflection, big picture, and that's strategy. So as we talk about the strengths in this context, we got to be aware of what our default thought process is, because again, we have the blinkers on. It's like, well, I just think the way I do. The imperative is to have that holistic 360-degree perspective on what we're not seeing that we're not seeing. And that's the critical component, and it's our responsibility to do that. So
again, talking to you, Chris, how do you, is there a difference in how you approach, for instance, men or women, depending on either side, versus how Wendy might approach men or women in the context of this subject? Do you because you're talking about thinking about it differently, do you approach it differently?
It's funny. Wendy and I were talking about this a couple days ago. I think one of the reasons we do what we do is I really don't see men and women in this context as different. I just hold them all to the same standard and just expect, and again, I have expectations, right? I have blind spots like everybody else does. I have bias like everybody else does. But what I expect is that people aren't going to be, judgmental. They're not going to snap into a default paradigm of exclusion. So that's just how I just treat everybody with equality. Wendy mentioned a resource. One of the books that I read literally 25 years ago in my life was a book by a guy named John Sanford called The Invisible Partners. And it's out of print now. I think you can probably get it somewhere along the way, but it introduced me to the fact that I've got a feminine essence inside of me. It's like we talked about before, it's the yin of the yang, and that's what makes me whole. Yep. And that's just kind of how I approach myself in my life. And that's one of the things I like about Wendy is she has the same perspective. And I don't really see her as a feminine woman. I mean, that's the package that she's in. But at the same time, I see her as just an enlightened human. And that's just how I see everybody. And I hold people to that standard.
I think it's great that you hold people to that standard. And I hope that they step into that. But obviously, if they did, you'd be out of work. But nonetheless, I mean, you and I, we all spoke about this previously, that I think that a lot of the time the challenge is that we are we see men and women as different, rather than seeing the conditioning as different. And when we get past the conditioning, as I said to you in a previous chat, some of the most nurturing people I've ever met are men, and some of the most focused and outcome-oriented people I've met are women. It's not a male trait or a female trait. It's a social conditioning, and it's a personality as we choose to do it. And I think that we've got to learn the strengths of each other. And to your point, Chris, I believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that we are all yin and yang. I know that I deal with yin men. A lot of my work is dealing with yin men in yang packages. I'm a very yang looking guy. You don't get much more masculine looking than me. I'm ugly in drag, and that's all there is to it. And there's no, this is not a pretty sight in a dress. I know, I've tried it. It's not good. Like, no way I'm going over for any kind of gender reassignment. It would definitely not work for me. So I'm very yang looking. I've got a very yang face. I've got a yang build, but I'm very yin. I cry at commercials, and a lot of the men that I work with have built this yang persona. We're very good. We look like that, but they're all beautiful, big-hearted guys who just need permission. And I think that part of the problem is that with the societal conditioning, and this is to speak directly to what it is you're talking about here, is that I think because of this gender inequality, men are afraid of showing their yin, and women are afraid of showing their yin. So women show up in business and in leadership, trying to be more male than men. And that's not where their strength is. Their strength is in their yin power. That's why I personally, it's my bias, I love Oprah. And the reason I love Oprah is not because of her like of spirituality or any of those things. It's that I see her as a powerful woman. She's not given up being a woman. She's not trying to be a guy, and she's still a woman. And I love that about her. Is that aligned with you guys, or am I a million miles from where you guys are going?
Well, I would love to jump in here because I think you raise a really interesting point. It's like, why would a woman feel she needs to act very yang in order to succeed in business?
Absolutely.
Right? Those are the cultural conditions that cause women to not be as yin as they maybe are, or men to not feel safe to reveal their vulnerability, right? These are the cultural conditions that have shaped and impacted all of us and are ultimately limiting us. But we can recognize that, well, a woman would believe she needs to act that way because that's where the power lives. This is about power imbalance.
It's about
Men
power imbalance.
hold more power than women in these current cultural conditions. And so whether it's conscious or unconscious, we're all geared to move toward power, right? Because powerless is threatening. Right. So it's the complexity of all of that. Yeah. And, and like you as two male allies, I so appreciate that you're like, I see everybody as equal and, that we all, have great qualities, and I just see everyone as equal, which is awesome. And I think what women need from male allies is a deeper understanding of how it is for women to be on the end of not having power, and how that influences our ability to even speak up or step forward or reveal all of who we are. Right? The condition says we're actually not allowed to, and so we have to risk in order to say, yeah, I'm equal. Right? Even in an environment that's like, yeah, we're totally equal. Come on, let's go. There's gonna be.
It's back to that thing like I was saying about white privilege, right? Where I was fortunate. Let's just call it that. I don't know if it's true, but I was fortunate to be born with testicles, right? So I had no knowledge, no real understanding of what it's like to have male power, right? And I love what you're saying there is this recognition of, that's why I was saying right at the beginning of this conversation, how do we get the blinders off? I want to help us as men and as women get the blinders off, because so you've seen those reality shows where somebody puts on a fat suit, who's an extremely judgmental person about weight, puts on a fat suit, and then they suddenly realize, holy crap, I face so much bias. Or somebody, is changed his race, and they suddenly realize racism, or even in Tootsie with, was that what it was called? Where he suddenly, and I saw an interview with Dustin Hoffman afterwards, and he said he cried of realizing what it was like to not only be a woman, but to be a non-attractive woman. Like the level of bias he had from men about being a woman, but the bias he had about being a woman who wasn't as attractive as other women. And I was like, wow, I just love that. And what I'm trying to do in this conversation is find out from you, Chris, and from you, Wendy, how, give it, if you can, and maybe you can't, I don't know, but if you can give us a way to peel that off. And so without me having to put a dress on, or without me trying to change gender, how do we get that? I get it because I live with an empowered woman who reminds me when I say things that have no malice to them whatsoever, but are unconsciously shitty things to say. And I have to go, so is there a way that you guys can help me with this?
Well, go ahead, Wendy.
Okay. So here's my first suggestion. Get clear about what and who you care about. If you're a man and you ultimately are interested in this issue and exploring whether you've got blinders on, go to a woman that you care about. Your mother, your wife, your partner, your daughter, and get in a real conversation with them about how is it? You know, how is it? What's it like for you to maneuver through the world? Get curious, because, you know, when we are in conversation with those that are most important to us, it has the greatest impact. You know, if you're a woman out there, do the same thing. Like, sit down with a man that you care about and find out how it is for them. What are the pressures for them around being a man, right? So that we can really, you know, get in touch with that which matters to us most and that which is closest to us.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, to actually tell me what it's like to be in your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. You were going to say something, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, Wendy, that was perfect. And then what I was going to say is, you know, it's funny because notice what's happening as we talk about this. There's an implication of fear, of threat. You know, as we talk about, here we are as individual humans adapting to cultural norms, you know, out there making a living and being the best person we can be in the skin that we're in. And the big issue is that we're oftentimes threatened by being more, I guess, call it enlightened in this context and more self-aware. And the people that are that way are the ones that oftentimes get singled out and almost condescended and some of the time belittled in that context, which is extremely unfortunate. So we need to confront that. You know, as matter of fact, Gillette came out with a video that went viral very quickly back in January called "We Believe the Best Men Can Be," and it was a 90-second video, and it was all about confronting that what is it? Caustic masculinity, toxic masculinity. And it was amazing. It was a great piece. It was about, you know, men, we got to step up and we got to be, you know, and the response it got was, you know, 30 million views, like, I don't know, 400,000 likes on YouTube and 1.4 million dislikes on YouTube. So we delved into that and checked that out. It was like, where is the confrontation? Why don't men want to be chivalrous gentlemen and be good people and work with women and raise good daughters and everything? And it was the threat. They were just threatened by, you know, and lots of comments. You can go to YouTube and check it out, but lots of comments. And the comments were, don't tell me not to be a man, I'm threatened and everything. It's like, you know, it's funny, Wendy oftentimes uses words in the context of describing thought processes. And for lack of a better word, it's almost like a Neanderthal process where people are thinking in a primitive way based on the reptilian psychology that we're kind of wired with around, I've got this masculine bravado and ego. And as I consider the yin of that yang, it's almost a threat to me to, you know, confront that. Not to me necessarily, but to people that aren't conditioned to be able to think divergently, you know, and let's take the blinkers off and let's be enlightened. But people are threatened over that. And I think that's what we get to confront directly head on.
So we confront the threat. I mean, you know, but I think there is, as we talked about before, I was part of the original men's movement with Gillette and Bly and King and all those guys, and did men's workshops and all the rest of it. And I saw it quickly spiral downwards into misogynistic shit about how women were taking men's balls. And I was like, you know, that's just not true. It's just not true at all. If your wife, your girlfriend has your balls in her handbag, it's because you gave them to her, not because she wants them. You know, and that's a sexist comment. I get it, but you know, I think that men have to own their own power just as much as women do. And as you said, Chris, I think we have to understand that a woman owning her power is not a threat to our power. That the two can live very well together. But I want to hear from you, Wendy, around this idea of, it is an interesting subject, the interesting subject around toxic masculinity, because as Chris just said, you know, many men feel threatened by this that it's not okay to be a guy. And that line is very fuzzy, where does the humor end? Where does where is it a dig? Where is it an attack? Where is it a playfulness? Don't hold that door open for me. I'm completely capable. Well, what's wrong with me holding the door open for you? Well, would you hold it open for a guy? Yeah, I would. Okay. So, so can you help us understand that from actually as two blokes here with Wendy, excuse me, Chris, but I want to really hear from Wendy on this one. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's so individual. The rule book isn't written for this. We're in the midst of change.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, back around to that, we're naturally resistant to change. There's that part of us that wants to know and understand, and so we can feel safe and secure, right? So we are in the midst of change, whether we like it or not, whether we resist it or not. We are in the midst of that, right? So our traditional roles are shifting. And so I, would encourage from the male perspective in discovering, okay, well, who am I supposed to be now, right? You've got to be in a conversation with yourself, and you've got to be in a conversation with the other gender that's there with you. Figure it out together, right? We've been in a unilateral power structure. Men have power, women don't. This is unilateral, right? Mm-hmm. Women can fight for power, and even if they got it, if we stayed in this unilateral structure, we would still be stuck in the same cycle.
Absolutely.
Right? So if we can shift into this idea of shared power, right? Yeah, it takes work, it takes curiosity, it takes willingness, it takes each of us developing the confidence to be a part of redefining how we be together as men and women.
Yeah.
Giving men more room to be vulnerable, giving women more room to be powerful in a feminine way. We're learning our way into this. And so again, to be curious and be in the conversation, we're the ones that are creating those answers.
I love that. And I think you brought up something that's very important, which is if you have the courage as you listen, as you watch, to take out your journal and as a man and say, what is threatening about allowing women to just own their own power? And as a woman, what feels threatening about owning your power? And I think those are just, and letting yourself just write on that and let the mind muck pour out, and just to get that sense of it, because as you both were talking about this inherent fear, and we all three of us understand this. The psychology is that we resist change, and because change is quote unquote threatening. In your work, what are you seeing? What organizations are you seeing that are doing the most to being more inclusive for women? Is there industries that are stepping up better than other industries, or is there particular organizations who are really at the forefront of this work?
Well, our experience, I just think that, the healthcare space is a good example. The healthcare industry. We work with a lot of companies in that space, and it's impressive. We just did an event a few weeks ago, and it's really impressive to see the men and the women stepping up, oriented toward progress and what can be. So the healthcare industry is championing that, I think. For what it's worth, the pharmaceutical space too. Lots of pharmaceutical companies are getting into that too. Those seem to be the flagship industries that are really getting it. I think. Anything else, Wendy? What's your perspective on that?
I think we're seeing a little bit more education stepping forward as well. And just to put in my plug, I think the entertainment industry should step on this bandwagon big time. Right? They could be such incredible way showers and influencers in the way that they face into and address what's happening in this very visible, very public space. And, on some levels, numbers are changing. People are having different conversations. More and more women are encouraged into the director's chair, et cetera, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And we know that unless a culture shift happens, right, unless we take that deeper dive that you're talking about, Dov, then the status quo creeps its way back in and things go back to the way that they were.
Right. And that's what I said about the women's movement in the 60s. You know, it was 50 years ago and we're still dealing with that nonsense. And the men's movement, you know, was great in the beginning, and then it became more of the same old nonsense again. And so, you know, I think that I guess my caution as somebody who's involved in transformational work is my caution is that I see change very often, dramatic, wonderful change that very quickly leaks back into the old familiar. And that's what I would love to see become different. And I would like your opinion on this. My thought is that as we in society are beginning to become exposed to a non-binary gender position in the world, it may actually help to cement this idea of equality between men and women. Because, and I hate to say it this way, because I just know the psychology of human beings, because there's a new enemy. Right? The new enemy is, oh, those weird people over there. So now men and women have got to come together because I mean, it's not right. Don't get me wrong for a second. I don't think it's right at all. But it forces us to become more accepting of each other. So when you go in to do gender partnership work, does that become an issue around a third gender, multiple genders, fluidity, those kinds of things? Does that must come to the surface in your work?
Well, you know, it's funny. I was going to bring this up earlier. What's really bubbling to the surface is one of the things we have to be is empathetic, right? Wendy and I have high tendencies toward being empathetic. So we go into a room, you know, it's really important to gauge the room, find out what the culture is, and respond to that culture and to that room. And one of the things I can respond to is I'm kind of gauging people's reaction to what we're talking about right now is judgment. I mean, we can't help it. As human beings, we're judgmental creatures.
Cool.
And in the context of, you know, just say the LGBTQ movement, right? By the way, Donovan, I don't know if you knew this, but in California, there are 26 gender designations in the state of California. 26, not just men and women, but 24 others.
Yeah.
And what we get to do as leaders is not judge that, not pass judgment on that. And, you know, it's be inclusive and embrace the, you know, the wonderful diverse thinking that comes from those perspectives, you know, and that's kind of hard to do as human beings because we're judgmental and we have unconscious bias and we were raised the way we were raised. And I think that's the key, is to be, you know, empathetic, respectful, and stop short of being judgmental of those conditions and embrace them and determine what their strengths are and how they can contribute.
Well, as you said, we can't help but be judgmental. That's part of our psychology, is who we are, but we can choose to go beyond it, which I think is what most people don't bother to do. And I think, you know, to stop and act like we were talking before about, well, what's it like to be in your skin as a woman, or what's it like to be in your skin as a man, is just as important in those other 20 odd classifications, because there's a way of looking at the world. You know, it's like saying, well, there's only black and white. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, I mean, what's another way of looking at the world? What, you know, and the opportunity in this is that as leaders, we get to see the world through another set of lenses that are not necessarily male versus female, but could be male, could be female, could be a transgender, could be a million other things, or whatever it might be. And then on top of that, different race and different culture and all those wonderful views that we could get into the world that could really help us a lot. One of the things you guys talk about is the psychobiology of all this. Talk to us a little bit about that. I want to touch in on that because I think this is a fascinating area that I think is going to help people.
I'll step in for that. So that steps us into the work of somatic coaching that I do. And, you know, somatics really includes the psychobiology, the intelligence in our body that is always communicating to us that we're often cut off from because we live in such a mental world.
Living the attic.
thought-focused world. And so, you know, our psychobiology holds our habits. It holds our shaping, right? Our cultural conditions influence who we become. Our experiences influence who we become. And so that becomes a part of our shape. That shape, those habits, then cause our behavior, especially when we're in pressurized situations. And so we can learn something new, right? We can learn the concept of gender partnership. Oh, yes, that seems like a good idea. Okay, I understand the construct of that. Great, let's go back to work. Until we actually shift our experience of it, right? Until we actually start to ingrain new habits and shift the old habits out, then our psychobiology is going to still be operating under the same operating system, the old one.
Right.
So we'll discover, well, I have this new information. I want to be being different, but I don't know. I just keep doing that same old thing. That's where this integration of like, yes, let's bring in new knowledge, but let's also have the actual experience, right, in our bodies, in the realm of psychobiology, to bring the change to that level, because that's when we start actually behaving differently.
And actually, I'll compliment with what Wendy just said. Is it turns out that our upbringing conditions us with a neurobiological association that represents itself in spite of how we want it to, in essence. So we have no control over how people perceive us based on how we were raised and our upbringing. That's shocking to me. I was actually in a therapy session a couple months ago, and we brought this up, and it's like, well, what can you do about that? Well, really, there's really not that much. It's the biological, wiring that is influencing us neurologically. And the thing is, I hesitate to think that there's nothing we can do about that. For me, as I process it, and we all get to process it in our own unique way, back to self-awareness and how can we show up in this context, is I determine that I can overcome this by listening more effectively, by slowing down, calming down, and being more confident in that context to counter that association that immediately shows up whether I want it to or not, So.
Yeah, this is great stuff, guys. It really is. We're getting close to the end of the show. This has flown by. Let me ask you this question. What is the most common misunderstanding about what it is that you guys do?
I'll jump in. That it's like some kind of sexual harassment training.
Okay.
Right? Talk about like, putting someone in a room and putting cognitive understanding and kind of a rule book and then sending them off, and then nothing really shifts, right? Right. So we're really there to create culture shifts inside of organizations to ultimately optimize the way that men and women work together so that everyone can thrive, be more productive, bring their talents forward, which ultimately impacts the bottom line, right? So so we're about that deep dive and that cultural shift and really making lasting change.
So the work you do is not about avoiding legal, it's about optimizing people.
Totally.
Well, and some of the time it starts with that, though, Dov. I mean, a lot of companies are stuck into a paradigm where that's all they're about is avoiding legal. And some of the time it starts with going in through the sexual harassment training door, if that's what it takes. Sure. But for us, it's about partnership. It's about gender partnership in business. It's when every member of the team works productively with every other member, regardless of gender, And it's breaking that paradigm where men and women learn from and leverage each other's unique special skills and talents, and they get creative, they get more productive, and then they're able to make decisions more effectively, as opposed to miscommunication, misunderstandings, and unconscious bias. And we'd love to confront that and take that on.
Fabulous. Well, like I said, we're getting towards the end of the show, so we're going to go into our speed round. Is that okay?
Speed round, let's go.
Okay, good. So each of you, what makes you cry?
Out of Africa, the movie.
Yeah? Why is that? Tell us. Why does that make you cry?
oh my gosh, it's just so epic and grand, and like the beauty and the expansiveness of the whole story. And also I think it's like yearning unfulfilled.
Wow. Very good. What about you, Chris?
The first thing that came to mind is the death of an animal.
Huh.
You know, like a pet. That makes me cry.
Wow. So the old Yeller movie or something like
Oh yeah,
that.
I'm a sucker. I cried at Old Yeller. I did.
Right. What makes you cry laughing?
You know, I'm just generally a joyful guy. I default to a mindset of gratitude, and I'm just grateful for things. And even this morning, I woke up, I did my meditation, and I looked out the window, and I saw the landscape and everything. And it was welled up. I can feel it right now, kind of coming back. This joy. You know, it's like there's so much beauty in the world. You know, and some of the time I'll well up, just out of gratitude and just being grateful for the fact that I just took the last breath I just did. I just breathed the breath. You know. So anyway, it's like that. It's that childlike wonder. You know, life is wonderful and the world is full of wonder, and that brings tears of joy to me on a regular basis. So.
What makes you cry laughing, Wendy?
Being really stupidly silly. I recently had the great pleasure of spending time with my mom and my two sisters. It was the first time just the four of us had spent time in 25 years. And we were so stupidly silly. We cried laughing again and again and again. And it was about that, just like completely stupidly silly.
Yeah, I love those moments, especially for those of us who have very serious, work to do. And then we like just to be with somebody who gives us the space, or we create the space to just be goofballs is just delicious.
Yeah.
I believe that real leadership requires courage, real courage. What's the most difficult leadership decision you've had to make? Most courageous leadership decision you had to make? Because I think that's what it is. It's courage.
Right. Well, I'll put it out there. I mean, like I said, mind is racing, lots of things. But the one that just is popping up in front of me is when I was in the Marine Corps, we had to deploy. You know, the Marine Corps deploys in a battle environment. Fortunately, I didn't have to serve in a combat environment, so I was blessed. Total of 24 years, I held a commission as a logistics officer of the Marine Corps, and I didn't have to be in a combat environment a single time. But I did a lot of peacekeeping missions. And there was a time where we had to deploy to Cuba, and I had one specific Marine that was having problems with his family, and he just didn't want to deploy, and he couldn't deploy. And I had to be the example of him for courage to be able to leave his family. And it was tough. And he had the courage. We were able to set up a support environment. But that took courage for me, with being a compassionate human and caring and being empathetic, that, hey, we have a mission to do, and you got to go, and you signed up for this. And I didn't want to be all militant on him and everything, but it ended up working out. We ended up setting a great support environment, but that was tough to have the courage, and frankly, being the example for him to have the courage,
Sure.
to be able to go away from his family. So that's just the one that pops up into my mind.
Thank you. And you, Wendy?
For me, it was a time when I had to let go of an employee that I was very invested in and had put so much energy, heart, and attention into giving them the skills and the support that they needed to do well in their position. And at the end of the day, they just weren't the right person for that position. Yeah. So to let them go.
I think that's always a courageous decision, is when you've invested in the potential of somebody and they just can't go there for whatever the reasons are at that time. And it's always deeply sad as well.
Yeah.
So in a parallel universe, what work are you in? What career do you do?
In a parallel universe. So
in a parallel universe, so you're not doing what you're doing something else altogether. What do you do?
But it has to be something else, Dov. It can't be what we're already doing. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It has to be something else.
Because by the way, I'm wired through multiple lives to do what I'm doing. I know I was a teacher in past lives and everything, but Wendy, I'm going to let you go first because I got to cogitate on this one.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got the yeah, okay. In a parallel universe, I am a kick-ass, incredible director of films
Ah,
and
wow.
creating, world-changing stories through the art of film, and I'm directing.
Is there a particular genre or?
Mm, uh, well, I have a heart for unsung heroines. And so any story that illuminates, heroines in our past that none of us might know about, or that none of us know about, that is always a realm, a passionate realm for me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is there one that comes to mind, one of those heroines?
Um, yes, in fact, her name is Dorothy Arzner, and she was the first female director in the Hollywood studio system. And she had a very prolific career from 1927 to 1944. She was the only woman directing at the time. And pretty much very few people know her name. And she's
Wow.
directed more films to date than any other woman in Hollywood history.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
hope you're right about her.
Yeah.
I hope you'll write an article about her as a great
Yeah.
example. That's
Oh,
wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah.
The story of Rosa Parks is a very big story, and everybody knows it. But what most people don't know is that there was somebody who predated her, who was a young woman who was like 15 years, 16 years old. It was a young black woman who refused to go to the back of the bus. But they chose Rosa Parks because she was a better representative.
Oh, isn't that fascinating?
There's another female who was unknown and is an unsung hero. So it's fabulous. I'd like to know more about your director. That's fabulous. What about you, Chris?
So as I'm thinking about this, here I am now, and Wendy and I are focused on, making business better. So I'm a business trainer and a consultant and a facilitator. In another parallel universe, if I wasn't doing that, I'd be a warrior. I know that, but I've done that. Again, as a Marine, I've been a warrior. So what really comes to mind, Dob, to give you an answer to the question, in a parallel universe, frankly, I would be a wolf. I would be a wolf.
Okay.
That's what is really striking me, is I feel like I've got that spirit of the wolf that's part of who I am. So in a parallel universe, frankly, I'd be a wolf.
A wolf or a dire wolf? Are you a Game of Thrones fan?
Actually, yeah. Well, I haven't. I need to catch up. I've watched everything up until the last 3 episodes, and I need to catch up.
So then if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you know what I mean by a dire wolf. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because
I'm mainlining GOT right now.
well, you know what I like about Game of Thrones is that it reminds me of a more noble era where I thrived.
Yeah.
It's that, maybe it's that dire wolf ethic, but I mean, when you think about the wolf, it's, being self-sufficient and ready and going and taking it on and having that courage and just being blind to anything that could stop me, and I just think that's part of who I am, and that relates to the parallel universe. So
Very cool. So as we finish up, please share with our viewers, our listeners, one piece from each of you, one piece of practical advice that they can put into place right now, immediately, in order to create certainly better gender equality, whatever it is you feel is the most important piece for them to really take home what it is you guys have been sharing.
The first thing that I'll offer is to get curious
Mm-hmm.
about your own bias, and find that one other person that's the other gender in your life, or another gender in your life, and get into a conversation with them. Get curious.
Fabulous. Thank you. Chris?
and from my perspective, it's about, take yourself on. It's what does Maslow say? The whole hierarchy, ultimately the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. So know yourself, know why you are who you are. And one of the things I love about you, Dob, is you're all about purpose, and discover your purpose. Why were you put on this planet? And that's not necessarily easy work because we're so stuck into a paradigm and we have unconscious bias and judgment and fear and all that stuff. But take yourself on, go into unpack your baggage, and discover who you really are in here, right? That's my advice.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you both so much. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources that you guys offer.
So I recommend you can actually reach out. My email address is Chris, so CHRIS at genderpartnership.com. And that's also a website, by the way, but Chris at genderpartnership.com. So you can reach out to me directly, and you can also check out that website and see what we're all about.
Yeah.
Genderpartnership.com.
Yeah, genderpartnership.com. Yeah.
And if you want to give us a call, you can call us at 310-383-3267. We're so happy to have a conversation about any questions that you have.
That's wonderful. Thank you, guys. We will, of course, make sure that all the links and that phone number is placed in there too. And if you want to get a hold of Chris and Wendy and find out what it is that they're doing, you can do that through their website. Like I said, we'll make sure we post all that. I want to thank you both for being on the show today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insights and getting us all to think a little bit more. It's been sincerely a pleasure. I sincerely appreciate it. And remember that as a listener, that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes on our Facebook page by simply going to Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as your speaker or your strategist for your organization, simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. The research consistently shows that even the fastest growing companies are challenged with spending money, time, energy, attracting, training, and developing top talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're frustrated with investing in the training and development of your talent, only to have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W, just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. And you can go through the Leadership Matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197, and it's absolutely free to you for being a listener and viewer of our show. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends, stay curious about how you can develop a greater level of understanding of the other gender, and be curious about your bias. And as Wendy said, be curious from another gender of asking them what it's like to be in their skin. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.